Hello, everybody watching us from YouTube. This is the ordinary session D from the second Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group workshop. The session is titled Income Distribution, Infrastructure, and Financial Systems. Elder Lara Ferreira Filho would be the chair of the session, but he's unable to attend. So I'm taking up his position here as the chair, and unfortunately will not be able to also hear his presentation, which was titled Infrastructure and Foreign Trade Elasticities, Empirical Evidence from China. Today here with me, I have Paul Carrillo-Maldonado, Professor of University de las Americas. He's presenting his paper estimating a time-varying distribution-led regime. And also I have Tatiana Camacho, a PhD student from the Federal University of Uberlândia, which will be presenting her research on instant payments, Brazilian PIX, and unified payments interface, a case study in time series. Following the structure of our program, I would invite Paul Carrillo-Maldonado to the floor to present his research. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Here you have some papers that I work with Michalis Nikiforos. We try to estimate if the distribution-led regimens about the wage-led and profit-led chains over time. Okay. The wage-led and profit-led regimens road is about some models about the Kalekian structural. We have the seminal documents, the Tauron, Taylor, that, somebody, but the most important for investigation and for research is the Baduri and Marlin papers, where there is a dual emphasis about the role of the great demand, and the distribution is driven about with the institution and the social norms. Okay, so when we try to understand this, we maybe think about what happens if you increase the wage share. So we maybe think that the raise the consumption, maybe fall the investment. So we don't know what happened in the net export. So we can understand theoretical interpretation about what happened in the output, or what happened in the growth, or what happened in the aggregate demand. So in the most of the literature of the papers understand that these regimens we estimate with the econometric methods with this and with country specific, we understand that this is a constant over time. So there is some exception that proclaim about the non-linearity of the distribution, like the Nikiforos and Foley, Assos and that, and the Tabani. So Marlin proposed that there is the variation the regimens along in the business cycles, and the Nikiforos in some papers propose that there is long-run variation on the degree of the distribution-ledness, and there is maybe there is change in the relationship about the growth and the distribution. So Nikiforos proposed in these papers also result Heileges this about there is some reason why the regimen cannot is permanent or constant over time. The first reason is the logical. So if you have the waste led or the profit led, we need to the optimal macroeconomic policy. We need to profit go to zero or equal to zero if we have waste regimen. But however, this is the absolutely or clearly absurd. So there is on the theoretical reason where we maybe think that the propensity investment and the consumption with the respect of the profit share maybe requires has the profit share increase. So the more important or the more fundamental rules about this is the dual natural of the wage, where the wage is part of the cost production, and this finances the consumption in the majority workers. Also, there is an empirical reason where there is most of the papers, many papers where we try to estimate the propensity of the on the components on demand with the probability, and we maybe change about over time. Sorry. There is last reason is the history of the economic thought reason. Basically, there is in the research project of the Baduri and Marlin is try to discuss or understand what happened with the golden age of the capitalist, and try to understand in the U.S. economy this. So, Nikiforus proposed that there is a low-run variation on the degree of the distribution-ledness, and he said that the wage-led increase has the profit wage increase. And why? Because the change in distribution is unstable and depends on the what is the degree or what is the regimen distribution in the economy. So he proposed a Polanyi predator press cycles model, or try to understand the reason on the instability. So here we try to understand that if this we found in the dynamics on the US and other economies in the last century. So the empirical literature normally try to estimate with two approach here in the structural and the aggregative. The structural try to understand what happened in the components of demand if you change on the distribution, what happened in the consumption, what happened in investment, and we try to understand what happened in the net export, and the aggregative try to estimate the overall effect in the total output of the rate of the capacity of the growth. So the structural approach suffers of the endogenous problems about the relationship in these variables, and try to estimate a linear investment function, but we also found that this proposed is the misspecification. Okay, the majority of the papers tried the distribution as constant, but there is some exceptions. Here you have some examples where they try to understand if the change in the distribution with the specific cutoff or specific change in some times, in some years, sorry. So we try to understand if we try to estimate if the effect of the change in distribution, what happened in the macroeconomic activity. So we tried the problem of the endogenous between the income distribution and the macroeconomic activity with the S-bar, and we estimate the change in the degree of the distribution-ledness. So we think that this is the first paper that tried to do this apport, this contribution in the literature. So we estimate some time variant parameters structural vector models, that's it. And we use the identification with the Cholesky distribution, the Cholesky decomposition. So I think we think the weight share is contemporaneously exogenous in the period on the time t, and not also in the dynamic. Okay. We use the US data, and we have the sample here. So we have the Bayesian model on where you include the weight share and the growth rates, and also we include or add addition some variables. We add the debt to disponibility income ratio. We include the productivity, trade balance, and government deficit, and we change the growth rate with the output gap. So you have the results, and we can see that the impact of the change on the weight share, what happened in the, we increase the weight share, what happened in the growth rate, and we can see here that the degree of the profit led increase until the 17, and fall the degree and fall the degree of the profit-led regimen. So we can find that these results in the different periods about the shock on the wage share. So we can show, or we can find also that the impact, this is the first quarters or the 0 quarters, and we can find that the cumulate effect is more important, and we can found that this in the early on the 2000 is maybe a slight weight share, maybe is smaller. Okay, so we add the household debt, and we have the same results, and maybe we can understand that when you include this variable, we found this volatility in the impulse response functions. Also, we include the productivity. This is the same results, not change in the statistical significance. When you include other variables, and we include the output gap, the result is also the same when you estimate. So, and some results analysis and conclusion, we found that the degree of the distribution changed significantly over time. We maybe showed that the U.S. economy became more profit-led in the early post-war, but this degree the crisis start in the late 17th. And also, we showed that the effect of the change in distribution of growth at a smaller time horizon is smaller than the long-run horizons. Okay, and we found that the war result is consistent with the theories of the long-run cycle fluctuation. Some papers that Nikiforos my co-author. Okay, this is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Hi. Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. So thank you, Paul, very much for your presentation. It was indeed very interesting. And I will open the floor twice for questionings. First, now, right after the presentation, and once after all presentations are done. So if ever anybody has a question, you could just write it on the YouTube chat comments, and then I will read it out loud. Just wait a moment. Let's see if anyone has a question right now. Okay. So if no one has a question at the moment, I will open again at the end of the presentation, of Tatiana's presentation, and then for questions for Paul and Tatiana as well. Okay, so now I would like to invite Tatiana to the floor to present her research on instant payments, Brazilian PIX, and unified payments interface, a case study in time series. Welcome, Tatiana, and the floor is yours. You have about half an hour to present.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, today I'm going to present part of my research thesis about instant payments, digitalization of financial innovations in Brazil, PIX, and unified interface payments in India, case study in time series, with as the advisor is Guilherme Jonas at Universidade Federal de Berlândia. So first, I'm going to give you a brief context on the importance of my thesis. With the globalization and internet, there was a widespread of financial innovations, and payment systems started offering tailored solutions in payments, loans, investments, using customer data and digital platforms through APIs. And with the emergence of these novelties worldwide, the Brazilian Central Bank studied the implementation of an instant payment service in 2018. That's when they decided to implement the system. And in 2020, with the aftermath of the COVID-19, they put in functioning the PIX in November. So this transformation has been going on worldwide for some time now. In India, the transformation has been going on for a decade now, and with the implementation of IMPS, that's an instant payment system, in 2010, and the second rail above IMPS, that is Unified Payment Interface, in August 2016. So to draw important conclusions for Brazilian economy and this new retail payment system, we used the Indian Unified Payments Interface study as the broad case for how we understand macroeconomically how this impacts in Brazilian retail payments. So First of all, the relevance is that UPI this year has reached 5 billion transactions in retail payments, and PIX now has reached 1.5 billion transactions according to the Brazilian Central Bank. And as we know, financial deepening and financial sophistication goes hand in hand with economic development through financial inclusion. So that's a broader relevance of our study. We do bear in mind that empirical studies of payment systems are country-specific, and but however, since both economies are BRICS countries and they have vast territorial dimensions and potential growth in infrastructure and mobile internet penetration, we can draw some important parallels between both of them using macroeconomic variables. So another important way to emphasize the similarities is the degree of financial sophistication that between Brazil and India for the 2010 and 2020 years is 0.56 in statistical correlation. So that's how we emphasize this study case. So we use time series, specifically ARDL and NRDL methodology with an Indian data set. We use some assumptions to build macro models through the volume of instant payments as the dependent variable. The independent variables are financial sophistication, M1 GDP, real-time gross settlement systems as a proxy for economic growth. Both of them, we expect a direct relationship to instant payments. Substitute payments such as volumes of credit and debit cards at point-of-sale terminals. We expect an inverse relationship, and volume of mobile banking, a direct relationship. And we use a measure of relative popularity of banking apps, that is volume of mobile banking through wireless subscription base. So these are the independent variables that we use for our empirical study. Some preliminary contribution is that financial sophistication and economic growth have direct effects on instant payments and vice versa. Other payment options like debit cards and credit cards will have an immediate complementary nature, not as well as a substitute finality. Volume of transactions via mobile banking has a positive effect on instant payments, as with use of mobile banking, more people will use instant payments. So that's a direct relationship there. And the measure of relative popularity of banking apps, there will be an important case for financial sophistication, not only financial sophistication, but important public policies for telecommunications infrastructure in Brazil to regions that are not assisted by these services. So last and not least, symmetry tests on our NRDL models show that if it's fast and instant payments, they suffer bigger impacts through negative shocks than positive ones. So models and variables. Our models are carried out basically by the framework of the empirical literature that was reviewed, and basically reports on the Reserve Bank of India. Reserve Bank of India, they use a currency in circulation through for GDP as a measure of cashless use of money, but we use here financial sophistication, that is what M1 GDP. Data used was monthly, taken from various sites that I will present here, but it's from April 2016 to November 2020. The sample size is 56, which is small for a time series analysis. But since ARDL is possible to analyze small sample sizes, we use UPI as the base case. So data was taken from UPI, was taken from National Payments Corporation of India. RTGS, debit card and credit card transactions were taken from the Reserve Bank of India. M1 was taken from the FRED. Telephone wire subscription base was taken from TRI, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, and GDP was proxied from annual GDP and was taken from Ministry of Commerce and Industry of India. So dummy variable was also applied to the year 2020 due to the COVID-19 effects on payment systems. So in addition to that, we did a seasonal adjustment and all the robustness tests for the estimated models, so we can verify our empirical results. So the RDL methodology is basically ordinary squares variables analysis with the legs of the dependent variable and explanatory variables. So basically, once we analyze the existence of long-term vectors between the variables, we through the bounds test of Pesara and Shin, we estimate the long and short-term coefficients of the models and the adjustment speed. The main advantages of IRDL is that it's efficient, unbiased, and suitable for small sample sizes, removing omitted variables and autocorrelation problems. So that's basically it. I'm going to pass on so we don't take too long here. So ARDL results. This is the estimated ARDL models. There was 7. The first 4, we use mobile banking and wireless subscription base and M1 GDP as control variables. And the last 3 was mobile banking transactions and M1 GDP as control variables. There was 7. And we did through the archaic information criteria and used the software EViews 10 to estimate these equations, okay? This is the bounds test approach. That's basically, we identify that if there is co-integration between these variables, and we can prove by Narayan's Pesaran's test, co-integration test, that there is at least at the 5% level for some of the equations that we calculated from the models we calculated. So with this result, we can identify long-term and short-term, long-term estimates and short-term adjustments through these equations. So the long-term estimates show that level of financial sophistication, credit card transactions, and debit card transactions are very significant. They have positive impacts. The biggest impact in magnitude was financial sophistication for models 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the models 1 and 7 weren't analyzed because they didn't have significant p-values. Short-term adjustments via error correction mechanism was also calculated. UPI lagged values, they showed statistical relevance, but they alternate between positive and negative impacts because UPI grows very fast, but then they grow in lower rates as time passes. And mobile banking, wireless subscription base, and RTGS and credit card transactions, M1 GDP, and mobile banking also have positive effects on UPI in the short run. Error correction terms, that is the correction adjustment to the long term, the short-term correction to the long term, were negative and statistically significant at 1% level. And these are the percentages that we found for each macroeconomic model. Yeah. So dummy variables were also relevant. R squared was relevant. We followed the Granger-Newbold to detect spurious regressions, a rule of thumb, confirming these econometric procedures. And summarizing, we can find that credit and debit card have short and long-term complementary nature to UPI. Mobile banking has short-term and long-term positive effects. Measure of relative popularity to banking apps have positive effects. M1 GDP has short-term and long-term, and real-time gross settlement system volume has short-term positive effects. So after RDL, we applied an RDL methodology to our 7 equations. Because linear econometric procedures doesn't clarify much of underlying functioning of an instant payments. So knowing that subject to asymmetries, we developed this approach too. And NRDL methodology is a modeling developed by Shin, and it's an extension of the RDL model, in which long run and short run nonlinearities are introduced via positive and negative partial sum decompositions. And asymmetry basically occurs when these positive and negative variations of the explanatory variables do not have the same impact on the dependent variable. So if we decompose these shocks, it is possible to verify these relationships are nonlinear. So NRDL results shows that we have 4 main equations. We did use mobile banking as positive and negative shocks, and we did use debit card transactions as positive and negative shocks, but they weren't statistically significant. So that's why we just show here positive and negative shocks of real-time gross settlement systems, credit card transactions, and so financial sophistication. These are the 4 equation models that we find with some statistical significance. These models were estimated with 6 lags through the Ecological information criteria and through EVIUS-10. So as the same thing as ARDL, we use co-integration test bounds for an RDL, and all of them shows long-run co-integration, and at least at the 5% significant level. So however, when we did these co-integration tests, when we applied long-run estimation and short-run estimation, none of the long-run coefficients of NRDL, they had a significant p-value. But it is possible to affirm that there is short-run nonlinearities. So we did estimate the short-run estimations and adjustments via error correction form. So the results are that instant payments past volumes will positively and negatively impact present estimations, just like our ARDL. Monetary economics are highly prone to economic activity, so historical lagged values will have relevant impact on present outcomes. And mobile, wireless, and M1 GDP have a direct relevant positive impact on instant payments. Error correction terms were also calculated in models 1, 2, 3, and 4, and in percentage terms. So to confirm asymmetry between the NRDL equations, we do asymmetric testing through the wall test. Impact asymmetry, here's the equations not showing, but it's a short-run asymmetry for the equality of the sum of the positive and negative legs of each regressor. The RTGS, positive and negative shocks on our equation did not pass the wall test. But however, models 2, 3, and 4 did, as we can show here for the estimation results. Okay. So results from NRDL and asymmetry tests. Decompositions of credit card transactions in Model 2 and 4 and level of financial sophistication in Model 3 showed asymmetric relationships. Correlations show that short-run negative shocks from credit card will produce bigger spillovers in instant payments. Negative M1 GDP shocks will produce an immediate response with a retraction throughout the economy, but counter-cyclical measures will only produce positive outcomes with a lag. So if you do counter-cyclical measures, there will be a lag to how the economy will respond to that. And depending on which direction public policy will be taken in economic conditions, there will be excessive volume changes on instant payments, as it is a real-tail payment form. In periods of economic downturns, agents will really prefer to retain liquidity if you're in a crisis or like the COVID-19, in postponed spending due to economic uncertainty, and they limit their expenses to autonomous consumption. So currency allow agents basically to keep open up their options to uncertainty and unpredictable economic events. So final considerations is that we identified that M1 GDP and economic growth and ARM and payment substitutes, credit card and debit card transactions, and measure of popularity of banking applications are relevant to these new forms of digital payments. Instant payments, they have developed way faster, where there are two important factors aligned: few payment alternatives, cheap pay alternatives, and high smartphone penetration, just like here in Brazil. Instant payments will capture an increasing portion of this market, but won't eliminate credit and debit cards at once, and high adoption rate in the first months of implementation, with additional incentives of other payment mechanisms through financial literacy, basically. Financial inclusion towards public policies aimed to telecommunications infrastructure are very important for the success of these measures. And fast payments suffer bigger impacts through negative shocks than positive ones. Basically, that's my presentation. Thank you very much for your patience and the audience.
Hi, thank you, Tatiana, very much for your presentations. Indeed, very interesting. I will open the floor again for questions on your presentation and on presentation from Paul. If anyone has a question at the moment. If nobody has further questions, I will read Professor Blacker's question for Paul. Professor Blacker asks if Paul have tested the robustness of his results by considering alternative orderings in which the weight share is contemporaneously endogenous, especially when productivity is included.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, when we include the productivity, the household debt, and other variables, these variables is included before on the wage. Then we have in the Cholesky identification, we need to include an order. So we have, for example, productivity, wage share, and the growth rate. So some question about the Robert, there is I take care about the Lara critics about the procyclical and contracyclical with the productivity and wage share relationship.
Okay, thank you, Paul. If someone has any other questions. Remembering that the question can be directed to Paul or Tatiana at the moment. Okay. Yeah, let's just give it a brief moment, because if someone is typing on YouTube, then it takes some time. If no further questions, I will thank again the audience and thank both the panelists for their excellent presentations. Remembering that this session is ending a bit earlier because of the absence of Elder and his presentation. And also this will be available in recording format on our YouTube channel from the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group channel. And thank you again thank you again, everybody, and hope you join the next sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Tatiana.
Thank you. Congratulations, you too.